So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Michael. I used to be a magician as well as a former Marine, and I got to experience a lot of things traveling and stuff like that and meeting different people. And what it helped me understand is that some of my beliefs or my perceptions of the world were incorrect because when I got into different environments, I had to change my perspective on the way I looked at things in order to go ahead and then change my perception and the way I perceive things so that I could have a better outcome. So let's get into it and let's talk about this, shall we? Because we are talking about creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality, but how do they come together? Well, I'm going to go ahead and use some psychology, some science, a little bit of artwork and creativity and break it down logically for all of you. So if I were to go ahead and do something like this, what would you guys say this is? Some of you might say this is the letter C. Some of you might say, well, this is a curved line, so on and so forth. But without having a proper understanding, i.e. context clues, right, you won't understand what this is exactly. However, if you change your perspective, you may call it something else. So if we were to change this now, instead of putting it this way, let's go ahead and turn it and change the perspective in which we look at it, right? So now if I were to take that same shape, right, and draw it this way, what would you guys say it is? Is it a curved line? What is it? The letter C on the side? What is it exactly, right? From your perspective, it can be an arc shape, right? Because of the arc, like a rainbow, etc. Even though it only changed the direction or I changed the position of it, it's still the same thing. Now, if I were to do something else, maybe you'll see something else, right? So if I were to take the same line, right, the same curvature, and I were to do this now, what do you see? Many of you see something that looks familiar. Some of you might say it's a symbol, etc., so on and so forth. And if I make these a little bit longer, maybe you could see them on camera, right? So you guys would see, some of you would say a fish. Some of you would say this is a symbol from different, whatever. Now I'm going to go ahead and do something else. Using the same curved line, I'm going to put something in here, right? Because the goal is to change your perspective or show you how to look at things differently, right? We started off with just a curved line that we thought was the letter C or a curved line or whatever the case may be. Then we turned it on its side and now it looked like an arc shape, etc., so on and so forth. Then I added another line and you guys got a different picture, right? Now if I were to go ahead and add two more curved lines to this, right? And let's do this. And I could color this in real quick, so on and so forth. Forgive my artwork here. But if I were to show you something like this, you would say, what does this look like to you now? Now, this may not look like nothing right here. I mean, well, then again, let's get rid of the crow's feet over here because, obviously over time, if you said earlier that this looks like an eye, the wise people would catch on to the phrase crow's feet because crow's feet are what develops on the edge of the eye, so on and so forth. If I get rid of that, you just see an eye, right? Now you're saying, where is this all going? Well, I think it's interesting when we talk about spirituality, science, art, logic, and creativity. What does the eye have to do with anything? Well, I mean, it first started with a line, right? But then you had to perceive that line and look at it from a certain perspective, right? If you saw it in one direction, right, you would see the letter C, so on and so forth. If you see it in another direction, you would see a shape or a curved line or whatever. When you start to combine it together, you start to see more of the picture, so on and so forth, right? And then, of course, now if I were to go ahead and draw a curvature here and a curvature here and fill in the middle here, right, that gives you a different perspective because it's granted a different image. It was still used with the same line. right? So now let's go a step further because I think this is pretty awesome and interesting. So if I were to get rid of all of this and now shift your perspective a little bit and now adjust the way you see this, maybe we can do something like this. Here, I got it. And then maybe we could do something like this, right? So on and so forth. Now, if I took the picture of the eye, right, and I turned it on its side, hold on, let me get rid of that, right, you would just get a vertical eye. But now if I kept the crow's feet from before, right, if I kept the crow's feet, let's just add a third one here. Now it looks like a crappy drawing of a rocket ship, right? If I take off the crow's feet, it is a vertical eye, which in some areas they talk about the third eye and things like that. Now, if I were to turn it back to horizontal, you will notice something very peculiar on the back of a $1 bill. On the back of a $1 bill, you should see something on the right-hand side, opposite of the eagle, and you'll see an eye, right? Preferably, you'll see an eye in a triangle, right? On top of a pyramid, so on and so forth. So how does this all work together? Well, if you know history, if you know anything about perspective and how everything works, we're going to go ahead and talk about it, right? So you saw this symbol here, right? So you saw this symbol here to be a fish or a symbol that means something to you. Now that I showed you what it can be, let's talk about it. If you are in the medical field or you understand optometry, you would understand that when light comes into the eye socket, right, it comes in one way, right, goes to the occipital lobe, the back of the brain, so on and so forth. It identifies what you're looking at, reverses the perspective in which it's receiving the information, spits it back out after passing that information to the rest of your brain so that you can identify what's in front of you. Are you still with me now? Right? Now, if I were to go ahead and put things into perspective to help you understand, excuse me, right? So now it looks like an eye or a bad version of an eye. When light comes in, it goes in one, right? We receive the light, but then the light has to get projected back out. And then, of course, as it's doing that and it's coming in, think of it like downloading and uploading. It's downloading information into your brain, and then it's passing and uploading information as it goes out to let you know what's in front of you. So now when you look at this and you understand that perception is not reality, because your perception deals with things you were taught, things that you believe in, etc. Your perspective is how you see the world that gets influenced by your perception. So whatever you were taught when you were younger, when you were taught as you were growing up, that became the way you perceived the world. So the saying, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. That's just your perception. Being a magician for over 20 years, I know if you understand people's perception and where they're coming from, and you're able to tweak a couple things, such as the scent in the environment, or the environment itself, or the way people speak, or whatever, the perspective gets influenced and it gets forced to look at things differently, especially when it comes into certain situations, understanding the brain. So when you're trying to look at something, don't judge a book by its cover, for you not know what is inside without reading the words that are there. And then again, you also have to understand the material in which you are reading and the words that you are using within there, right? Because a lot of this really comes down to a level of understanding and how much do you know. The more you learn, the more you earn. This was said by Warren Buffett. Now, if you learn a lot of things, your perception of the world is going to be a lot different than a lot of other people. And then the way you have your perspective on the world will be different. You won't see just the negative. You'll also see the positive side of things, so on and so forth. So this is where I'm trying to go with this. I want people to start focusing on the positive things in life, but the only way you can do that is if you change certain perceptions you have of not only yourself, but the things around you in your environment. And then that'll help you control and adjust your perspective on the way you look at things through your eyes, right? Because one of the things I've heard before in the past is belief comes by hearing, faith comes by sight. And I was always curious about this because a lot of people were like, no. Belief comes by sight and hearing, so on and so forth. Not necessarily true. If you're in business, you know there's something called lip service. Or if you grew up in the street, you would understand the phrase talk is cheap. But the one time that you actually believe something is when you see it with your own eyes. Remember when David Blaine came out on TV, so on and so forth. He was a regular magician, but he wore regular clothes, etc., went around with a deck of playing cards. And then when people invested their time, energy, and attention to him, they were able to take in different things, right? Because when they saw him, their perception and perspective of him was a lot different, because people who saw magicians normally saw them at children's shows or on stage in Las Vegas. They were either wearing some type of certain attire, etc. Whereas David Blaine came out in plain clothes as a regular man and started to blow people's mind and shift their perspective on what was possible, right? So when you're looking at things like perception and perspective, you have to look at, well, what do you believe, right? A long time ago, there was a gentleman with the last name Bannister, and he was the first person to break the 4-minute mile. Before him, everyone's perception of the 4-minute mile was pretty much the same, and their perspective was that nobody could achieve it. However, when Bannister went and broke the 4-minute mile, doing something in psychology called the power of one. Once you see something once and it's right in front of your face, it's very hard to not think that either you have the capabilities or that it's not possible anymore. So when this happened, they had to shift their perspective. And if you're able to shift your perspective, then you're able to change your perception on things. So if you were to look at life and look at the world, right? What inspired you to get to where you are? It had to be something that you saw or something that you heard, but you needed to see something in order to help you take action. Yes or no? So a lot of people will hear this, right? And hear things, and they'll believe in certain things. 1 + 1 = 2. What's it called? What comes after A is B, C, D, E, F, G, so on and so forth, etc. But then, of course, I tell you, well, those are not even the letters of the alphabet. Let me explain now where those came from. And I start showing you different characters from Greek or Arabic or Sanskrit or whatever the case may be, where language and stuff started to originate and where words started to come from in letters, etc. It would change your perspective on certain things. Then you would understand what an entendre is, right? Because if you don't understand what an entendre is, you'll take things very literally, right? And now talking about creativity, logic, and art, if you're into hip hop, so on and so forth, or rap, or you're young and you know about slang and ebonics, so on and so forth, you'll hear kids today say words like, yo, that's cap, which means it's a lie. But a cap to somebody else could be a bottle cap. If you're in certain areas, you can say something like bust a cap, right? That's a different way of saying it. Hip hop artists mentioned it in their lyrics, etc. And then, of course, there's a baseball cap that you can put on. So what are they referring to, right? It's a double meaning for the same word. Now, when you're using things like entendre, you can use it to mean two different things at the same time, right? So now let's go back to our little example here, right? So we came up and then it comes back down, etc. So we have this whole thing here. What does this look like to you right now? Well, it can either be a fish, It could be a rocket ship. It could be a hot air balloon, whatever the case may be. If you're saying, where's the hot air balloon? Well, if this was the balloon here, we could put the basket right here, and then obviously so on and so forth. But that's something different. So let's talk about this, right? Because if we were to continue this pattern, because one of the things you have to understand in life and in business, or just in general, is that things normally happen in certain patterns, right? So if this path were to continue, right, we would get something like this, right? Etc. Does this look familiar to anybody now? If you're in the medical field or you've been in science, physics, etc., it may look somewhat similar or familiar to you. If I cover this bottom part up, you could say that's the number 8. If you look at it from the side and change your perspective, it may be the infinity symbol. But if I remove this, right, you see that it keeps going. Now, if I were to do something like this, right, what does this look like to you now? That looks like a strand of DNA, right? Same image we were working with before, we just had to change the perspective, right? And what I mean by changing the perspective and using creativity and art is you cannot just see things for what it is that they are, because at the end of the day, things are not always as they seem. And so therefore, if you're looking at this one way, you may say, well, yeah, no, that's a string of DNA. Interesting. You recognize this as a string of DNA, but yet when I covered this bottom part up and erased the lines, you thought it was the number 8. Your brain was limited because it was never trained to look at things for all that it could be, right? It's just trained for what it is, your perception and beliefs, right? So you take things very logically, and that has to be that because that's what it looks like. If it walks like a duck and acts like a duck, it must be a duck. For those of you in business, I'm sure you've had crappy salesmen before, and you can hear them trying to say certain things and do certain things, and you're like, I'm picking up what you're laying down, but I'm not feeling it. And that's because, well, they're not being authentic, right? And what's the most important thing now when it comes to building a personal brand, social media, or any presence in the world is to be authentic, to be yourself. Don't fake the front, as they say, and don't put on a fake facade. In other words, if you're used to wearing shirts like this, or maybe every day you wear a black t-shirt or whatever the case, or you like to wear business suits, go for it. Don't change your appearance to go ahead and then appeal to somebody unless, let's say, it's like an interview, something important, etc. But I'm saying in your everyday life when you go out, let's say you're developing content, let's say you're trying to meet new people, don't change yourself, accept yourself, perceive the world differently, and change your perspective on how people are going to take you. Because I can tell you right now, your current situation and your perception is only based on the things you know right now. If you are comfortable being uncomfortable, which is something that a quote that comes from the military. Once you get comfortable being uncomfortable and going outside of your comfort zone, as they say, you'll be able to understand and learn a lot more. How was I able to not only figure this out from a simple, excuse me, a simple line such as the curved line that we saw before or the arc and then build upon it, but then again, how could I correlate this to your DNA? Think about that for a second, right? Because if I were to get rid of this bottom half right about here, there's your fish that you saw earlier. If you turn it on its side, it breaks down how the optical vision works, how light comes in one way, hits the occipital lobe, and then goes back out and projects the image. And so your brain's able to interpret and recognize the world around it. If you're able to control what people see, and you already know that they're going to hear you, you can do a lot of things. However, if you take it a step further, right? Because now you're an adult. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier were the crow's feet, right? So a lot of older people will understand that when I drew the symbol of the eye here, right? And I had the crow's feet, right, on the edge, that's what develops over time as you mature and become an adult. However, if I were to just erase that, right? Now you have a standardized I, etc. But where am I going with this, right? What I'm stating is that you have to not always believe everything you see. And when it comes to the things that you hear, you might want to fact check those things and find out for yourself. In other words, don't take someone's words as fact or proven fact. Go out, venture out. By all means, use ChatGPT, or you can use other AI platforms like Google's Bard, which is free and has real-time access to the internet. If you're not comfortable with that, go on other platforms, so on and so forth. Not saying I'm encouraging people to move away from Google, etc., but you can go ahead and do that. Now, when it comes to understanding everything I just said here, what I'm trying to do is stretch your mind and imagination, imploring that you utilize creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality and figure out how it all comes together. Because if we go back to the symbol that we saw earlier, right, where it went from the curved line to the arc to the fish, and then back to the eye, right? But if we look at history, it's the same thing when it talks about spirituality, right? The Egyptians had the all-seeing eye. Hinduism talks about the third eye in consciousness. When you talk about science and psychology, when they talk about consciousness and things like that, they want to know if you're walking through life blind, meaning are you living in disillusion? Right? Disillusion means that you're living a fake facade fantasy world. But what word is in there? Illusion. And the only way to experience an illusion outside of mentalism is by seeing something happen in front of you that you thought and deemed impossible. This is why when you see a magician, a great one at work, it makes you wonder, how in the world did he do that? And it makes you want to see more, right? The same thing applies to business and marketing. When you're doing your advertisements, you want to say and do enough in the video to make people say, I want to see more. Right? Same thing with your marketing, etc. Now, marketing is a big world and you have to plan everything out. And there's a lot of different areas of marketing that people could specialize in. You have people specializing in public relations. You have people specializing in copywriting. You have people specializing in graphic design. And then, of course, it deals with paid media, organic media, so on and so forth. So where do you start? Well, I would say, one, choose something that works for you, that you're comfortable with, that is normally free to begin with. So where would you go? You could go on YouTube, Google, and any social platform. Go ahead and do your research, right? Look at different ways to utilize different things that you have already, because I promise you, I can show you exactly how to become successful, not only with what you know right now, but with the things that you have right now. And I can tell you, if you're watching me through a phone right now, you have a lot more than most people, and you can definitely do something with your life when it comes to either getting into business, making more money, or just bringing in a little bit of extra cash on the side, just using your phone to help businesses go ahead and produce content for social media. Or you can go ahead and use AI to help you, and then have AI produce the stuff for you, and then you hand that to your client. So these are the different things I want you to start thinking, because yes, I'm writing on a whiteboard, but it's still in a box. Think outside of it, and then you'll get a lot further. In a video I did in the past, I talked about Will Smith. And Will Smith, during one of his interviews, talks about a old IQ test, right? The old IQ test that they had 9 dots, right? From what I remember in his story. And the goal of the IQ test was to connect all the dots without taking the pen off the paper and without crossing over the lines. Well, they never stipulated a lot of rules, but they never told you much either. They just gave you the directions to connect all the dots, etc. Don't take the pen off the paper. But because of people's perception, right? What they were taught, what they believe, etc. They looked at the box and the edge of it like a game of tic-tac-toe, and they put parameters on themselves, right? Because if this was a game of tic-tac-toe, the only way you could get, etc., would be to stay within the box. But the funny thing is that those that had the high IQ, and I'm going to quote Albert Einstein on this. Albert Einstein once said that college does not measure the level of intelligence one has. It measures their ability to remember information. Creativity is the thing that measures one's level of intellect. So when people started to do this, a lot of them would stay in the box and they couldn't figure it out. It wasn't until one person literally took the marker or the pen and went outside of the box to go ahead and then finish everything else, right? So you have to start thinking differently, right? You have to start shifting your perspective. You have to start questioning certain things that you hear, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people giving lip service, whether it's on the media, whether it's in your own life, whether it's in your environment or not. Go ahead and I want you to start questioning things. I want you to start looking at things from a different perspective. And some of you might be asking me, well, how did he come up with all this just by a curved line? Well, one day I was messing with stuff because I used to do a lot of art / graffiti, etc. And I was looking at different things, but I was laying down. And so when I saw this and I laid down, I was like, that's interesting. And then I built upon it. And then that's how I ended up with a string of DNA and things like that, so on and so forth. So it was one of those things that when I shifted my perspective and when I got into magic, it showed me how to look at things and utilize them in a different way, right? So for instance, I'll give an example. Right now, I'm drinking body armor. No, this is no endorsement or whatever, but I'm drinking fluids out of a bottle, right? And so this to you is just a bottle that can be used, to hold water. Now, sometimes what I do is I could go ahead and fill this up, throw this in my freezer, and now it works as an ice pack for me. Or I could put it in the tub when I do a cold plunge to help cool the water down, save, on ice and things like that. Or I can leave this filled up through sink water after I'm done using it, use it to hold the door open, so on and so forth. Or I could take a bunch of these, put them in a backpack so that it's weighted, and go on a little hike. And then if I ever get thirsty, pull one of these out and I have water, and it also reduces the weight in the backpack, making the load easier to carry, and I could still get through my workout. So you can go ahead and, try this for yourself. One of the things I noticed is that over time, as people grow up, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with personal development and people like Brendan Bouchard and guys like that. But one of the things I learned that these guys are doing is they're teaching you how to think like a child once again, right? To use your creativity, to break certain things, right? Because children are very creative. You give children a bunch of cardboard boxes, they'll build a fort, they'll do other stuff, they'll make planes, etc. But over time, I don't know what it is, adults lost their creativity. Then they relied on listening instead of investigating and learning. In other words, you get taught in school to listen to the teacher. You get taught in school certain things like authority and social proofing and, social status. So when you see somebody in uniform, okay, that's authority because he's wearing a police uniform, right? Or that's a very important person because they're in a business suit. But not everybody dresses like that. I hope you understand this, right? Not every teacher is wearing the jacket with the button-up shirt, etc. There are some teachers that are cool that maybe have sleeves, etc. And they're, it's different, right? There are police officers that don't always wear, the beat uniform, right? They wear standard clothes, etc., and things like that. There are also people that are in business that are very successful that never wear a suit. I remember, and I'll tell you this story. I was working at the Embassy Suites where I'm at, and we had a convention, and there was a gentleman by the name of Ed Hardy. If you're a fan of Ed Hardy, they had a convention, a tattoo exhibition actually, and he came in. I didn't recognize him at first because when he came in, he had the business suit on, sleeves and everything down to here, with this, so on and so forth, super dress, covered up, etc. He checked into the hotel. I saw the name Ed Hardy. I assumed it was an employee for the business Ed Hardy, not actually Ed Hardy. Well, lo and behold, about 15 minutes later, after he left the front desk, he comes back down, changed his whole attire, hula shirt, t-shirt, freaking tattoo sleeves, freaking legs done up. He was wearing shorts and flip-flops. And he's like, hey kid, what's up? Can I get an extra room key? And I'm like, are you the same person I just saw? He goes, yeah, Ed Hardy. And I was like, are you with the company? He goes, no, I'm Ed Hardy. And I was like, oh, okay, this is different and interesting. And it exposed me. And what it did was it forced me to change my perspective, not only about the world, but the way I perceived certain individuals, right? And this, I hope, happens to a lot of you. I want you to go ahead and challenge and do things like changing your perspective in order to perceive the world in a different way. Because then and only then will your eyes be open and you'll stop walking blind. If that makes sense, right? Think about the line, right? How can you either build upon it or use it in a different way? Because I can tell you right now, this right here is a curved line, or it could be the letter C. But this right here is an arc or a shape of an arc, but it's the letter C on its side, or this curved line, etc. Here's the interesting thing. If you look at geometry, an arc is actually one of the strongest structures you can possibly have next to a triangle or sphere. Remember, the arc is only a half of a sphere, right? So if you were to take a sphere, cut it in half, right? Let's do this. So if you were to, don't worry, I'm coming full circle. So if I were to take a sphere, right, and then I were to cut it in half, that would give me my arc, right? Because of the way it's separated, etc. Now, what makes this so awesome is that, granted, next to a triangle, this is one of the strongest shapes used in structural engineering because of the downward force. It's able to distribute weight evenly. When it comes to the arc, however, you may pronounce it as an arch in architecture, right? This distributes stress evenly throughout. This goes directly, this is throughout. So in other words, this all works together, right? But you have to change certain characteristics, right? Because the only difference between the arc and the triangle is the direction in which the line is moving, right? So what do I mean? So you have one line, that's the base, right? Whether it's a triangle or the sphere. But then you have to look at this part here. So obviously this could be a dome shape or whatever. But if I were to push, right, or put a support system, think about building a tent. If I were to put a stick right here and this was cloth, this would fall, and it would make a triangle. However, if this was a structure, it could take hits from all sides because of the way it arcs. It's able to distribute the weight or the impact of the force evenly. Now, when it comes to the triangle, right? When it comes to the triangle, yes, that's a downward force, downward pressure, which gets evenly distributed along the base, moving through the sides. But what happens if something comes in catty corner, right? If it comes in from this angle or this angle, it's going to be very difficult for that to go ahead and evenly distribute certain impacts, right? That's why you have the dome, right? Or the sphere or half sphere that you call the arc, right? And the arc is simply a shape, and that's arc with a C, not a K. That's a different thing. So when I'm talking here and what I'm trying to help you see is that we have all been in a quote unquote school system, right? And then of course, when you go to school, you take class and there's many subjects that you get taught in class, but no matter how you jumble them up, they're gonna fall into one of these categories, whether it's creativity, logic, art, science, or spirituality. Some of you might say, well, what about the medical field? Well, first of all, you definitely need science, right? Then you need to be a little bit of an artist, because if you're sewing somebody up, you don't want their stitches to come out wrong. Then you have to use some type of logic when you're performing surgery, or you're diagnosing something, or you're mixing chemicals because you're giving something to somebody, such as a antibiotic to them, right? And then you have to use some creativity, i.e. this goes for people, especially in holistic medicine, where they have to look at the whole person and then pretty much adjust their perspective because they know everybody is different, then use some creativity based upon the things they know so they can prescribe you the right thing. And then if you're a doctor performing, let's say, heart surgery, cancer surgery, or you're treating somebody for some ill disease, some of you, not all of you, because a lot of you have a God complex, but some of you have to have some type of hope that something is going to happen, something positive is going to come out, and that would be the spiritual side, right? But even still, with all of that, if you were to look at the symbol for the medical community, you will notice the symbol that we drew earlier, right, which looked like a strand of DNA, so on and so forth, also is on the staff or the symbol that actually the medical community uses. So go ahead and start fixing your perspective. Go ahead and start changing things and the way you look at it, so you can go ahead and influence your perception and the way you see things in the world. And maybe you'll start asking better questions and getting better answers out of life. So I hope this video made sense to you. If you have questions, please put them down below. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button. It definitely helps me out, and it also helps the algorithm find more people like you so they could go ahead and have their eyes open. And if you definitely want to see more, or you have some topics that you want to talk about, throw them into the comment section or DM me. I'll be more than happy to go ahead and educate you on those things. But this has been lesson 1 to the series class, and I just want to say thank you. Have a great day.